By way of introduction, I'm an anthropologist, an ethnologist, not an archaeologist, and I spent most of my career in museums, both in Santa Fe at the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture, in the Laboratory of Anthropology, and then in Washington, D.C. as part of the founding staff. I was a director of research and collections for National Museum of the American Indian. And I'm really much more of a practitioner than a theorist. And I only have one R word I'm really going to focus on since I'm from the United States, and that's really repatriation. And I've really been involved with repatriation from its sort of beginnings. And without getting too much into the law that governs repatriations in the United States, it is called NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. And you have to say it that quickly, it's very important. And as it's called NAGPRA, and there are 5 categories of classes of things and people that can be returned: human remains, associated grave goods, unassociated, sacred items, and objects of cultural patrimony. The law is about 3 pages long, and the regulations are about 250 pages. I don't know how one legislates culture. I don't really understand how one does that. Although I've tried to work within the law in my career, and that's why I consider myself to be much more of this this practitioner than theorist. And I think that it really starts at that level. I don't think that things come down as laws, and we're very reluctant. But I think from the ground up, there can be great things that happen. So I thought I would take a few things about my experiences and tell you about them. I made some notes that, of course, I can't read now. So the law itself, NAGPRA in the United States, is written by the government and lawyers, is written by just a small segment of people, and it is adversarial in its tone. So immediately when Native people come into a museum, it can be adversarial. And it's adversarial because it's about 2 sides. It's about the Native and non-Native side, or the Native and the museum side. So the first thing one must do is get rid of that adversarialness and become partners or collaborators. Now, a lot of anthropologists get very upset about NAGPRA because they think that it's something that's going to take something from them. And I always wonder about those so-called scholars, because what NAGPRA really does is it gives them a great gift. It puts their subject matter sitting down right at their desk with them. It allows them to share. So it's not a matter of shifting agency or ownership. It's really about adding to a body of knowledge. And if people come together and begin to add to that body of knowledge, there's really some amazing things that can happen. So there is something else we talk about in the States, and that is called the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law. And that just means following the ethics. Just the other week, I was in a session with some people, and David Warren, a great elder and scholar, Dave said that we're currently in one of the great ethical correction periods of our lives. And he was really referring to these issues. Now, NAGPRA has also focused on product and not process. And I think that is the key difficulty with it. So NAGPRA is developed, and a tribe makes a claim for let's just say, an object of some type, and the object goes back, and that's the end of it. Now, if we listen to what the indigenous people have to say about the piece is a living being. And by that living being in the museum all those years, it has some part of its life where it does have a conversation, and it's a conversation to share with its indigenous people when it returns home. So the real process of repatriation happens at the return of the object. But all the money in repatriation goes to the return, and then after that, there's a silence. But what in that silence is the true room for change? And if there is another R word to use here, probably reconciliation. And it's that silence period that other museums experience that I really want to focus on. Now, recently, a very famous situation happened in Paris with these Hopi masks that were sold, or Hopi friends. They're in private hands. They were put up an auction in Paris, and they sold for a great deal of money. There's actually been 5 different auctions with Hopi masks in it. Only 2 of them have been well publicized. Large foundation stepped up and spent $500,000 American to purchase some of them. But the problem with it was, it made such an adversarial situation. All Lee Jenkins can say from the Hopi side was, they're all ours. And without consideration of what those individual pieces are, it just puts them in a situation that's almost an impossible situation. So there is another R word I'd like to throw out here, since we're doing R words these last couple of days, and that's reconciliance. It's another word I think that it's developing, like cultural aphasia, developing a new set of words, a new type of conversation. Now, I've been fortunate to be in some transformational projects and from very interesting projects, and to really build from the ground up a different type of operation, different way of being in museums. One of the projects I did was in Santa Fe. It was a 10-year project. It was an exhibition, what we call a permanent exhibition in the States, and it was about, it's called Here, Now, and Always. And it was about the museum stepping back from its authority, people like myself with PhDs, and letting Native voice come forward into the museum to be the voice. And also to understand that the museum was nothing more than a thinnest slice or a portal into understanding who Native people are. It was more like an introduction. So often in museums, we, and our visitors too, take the position that you're going to learn everything there is to know about someone in a single case. All you need is about 5 objects, 300 words, and you're done. Now that is just impossible with the complexities and nuances of who people are. So if you could step back from that and begin to give some of the multifocality of people, that would change things enormously. And it also meant the museum needed to step back, and people like myself particularly, that we're not the experts. We're facilitators. We're advocating. How much more time do I have? Not much? About 5 minutes? Okay, well, I better keep going. 7 minutes. Oh, I'm only halfway through. And the other thing I wanted to say about that project, which I think was very important, is it caused a little bit of discomfort in our visitors. And why shouldn't it cause a little bit of discomfort? If any of you ever have been written about or in an exhibition, it's really hard to see yourself, first of all. And why shouldn't you be just a little discomforted by what you thought or who you thought Native people might be and who they really are? So the discomfort is a learning tool. It's not we wanted people to run off, but it's a learning tool. It's an entrance. It's something that the docent or the curator can then say, well, maybe this isn't quite how you understood things. I want to show you just a series of images. And so one of the projects, I was at National Museum of the American Indian Smithsonian, and as I said, I was director for collections and research, and was hired to do some very specific projects, wonderful projects. And NMAI I thought was an interesting project, and thinking about what's been said here over the last couple of days, it was really the building of the building and the establishment of the museum within the Smithsonian was the reconciliation. I had truly thought that, and it was an amazing day when we opened in 2004. There were 25,000 Native people who arrived that day in Washington. I don't think anybody quite knew what to expect. People came from all over the hemisphere. It was truly a wonderful event. It was the moment when the United States at least admitted that there are Native people. It didn't do anything about the ongoing relationships with Native people. I had thought and I had advocated for a federal apology to Native people as part of the opening. That was a no start. I had also advocated for 4 mass reburial sites around the continent in which unidentified remains could be buried, both in honor of, as a point of reconciliation again, and also as a continuation of the meanings of the museum. Again, a no-starter as far as that went. Because what I began to recognize in the building of the building, it was just placing the building on the National Mall. We did try and do those same types of exhibits in Washington. That was one of the things I was asked. And they were largely not appreciated. And they were largely not appreciated because it wasn't the stories that the critics expected. There were no feathered bonnets and war ponies and things like that. They weren't the stories they read in their storybooks or American history books. They were stories from people about who they are. And that really bothered our visitors. The museum is now in process of changing those out and changing the format. I don't think they're giving that up, but I think they're changing the format a bit. We were very strong that Native people would be the curators, that the staff itself would not be the curators. And we traveled to these communities. We literally traveled with the exhibition models and went to and had public meetings in the communities. They really were community built. People really feel like these represent their world. These two pieces, this is a Yupik on your right, and this is Santa Clara Pueblo on your left. And what they did was they constructed their worldview or their cosmology in the exhibition itself. But this was one of the ways that our curator decided he wanted to talk about history. And we agreed with this approach. No one liked this approach. He thought there were three things that pulled Native people together throughout the hemisphere, three common elements: guns, Bibles, and treaties. He thought those were the three things. So a wall of guns in an exhibition about Native histories. People were not so confused, but they didn't want to face that reality. And the guns went from the very earliest types of rifles that Europeans had brought for hunting as well as shooting one another to modern weaponry in the United States Armed Forces. So it just included the entire, and within those, there was Sitting Bull's rifle and some other pieces like that were very important. But that's not the enduring part of the project as far as I'm concerned. I think the enduring part of the project is the Cultural Resources Center, which is a separate building from the museum downtown. And this is the Research and Collection Center for the museum. Thanks. And it is a home for the collection. It's not a facility. It's not a warehouse. We tried not to call it storage. But this is really a true home, a beautiful place to hold these collections. And we had an extraordinary opportunity. We moved the collections from New York City to Washington, D.C. It was a 5-year project, 830,000 objects. We photographed every single object. We took care of the objects. We did what we called cultural care for every object. And what I mean by cultural care was that we couldn't always have the specific tribal group there to watch over their objects as they moved. But if there were a great many objects from a particular tribe, we might have them come in and talk to us about how to move things. The Zuni came. The Zuni is a tribe in New Mexico, and a couple of representatives of the tribe came, and there's about 50 altars, religious altars, in the collections. And they felt that, and although they were all made for the museum as replicas, so none of them are real, they felt they should still all travel together. So in one crate, we weren't supposed to put anything else but that one altar. There are many pieces to it, and in that way. With the Plains material, it was different. There's many, many religious bundles in the collection, and so we emulated the way that Plains people used to move their religious material in the 19th century. So all the trucks came to Washington, and then we had a separate truck for all the religious material, was the way that we reconciled that. Now, we were also involved in a series of projects, and I want to tell you about a couple of the repatriations that we got to be involved with. These two women from Haida, or Haida Gwaii, 2 minutes. They went through United States collections, and they found 660 of their ancestors that had been removed from cemeteries and brought them home. It was a 5-year project just to find them, and they also built burial boxes for every one of them. And part of it was traveling around the United States and going through collections. And when they came to the Cultural Resources Center, you can see there's no staff around them, there's nobody hovering, they're by themselves. And in the same way then, that when people come into the collections, they're really on their own. Because part of moving the collections then was to train the staff to get out of the way. And I mean literally out of the way, that not to stand between the person from the community and the collection, but to step back behind them, to allow that person to have the first interaction with it. This is a very interesting case. The museum has over 2,000, that's 2,000 medicine bundles from a particular tribe in Montana, which is the northern part of the United States. And of these 2,000, in 20 years of trying, I'm 0 minutes, only 20 of them have ever been returned. This is the projects I'm working on right now. I'm on the other side of the equation, 30 seconds. On the other side of the equation, I'm working with a community called Pewaukee, and we're going to those same places. We're going to collections and bringing them back to Pewaukee. And when Pewaukee sees this, they get quite excited. You can see on this piece here, it says their name on it, and their exclamation is, "Oh, look, we're in the museum. We're in the Smithsonian." So I like that a great deal. This is the other way we're doing it. We're actually out on the landscape with people and looking at these places that are ancestral places. And this is the beginning of this process that I found these 4 pots in a museum in New York. I found the photograph in New Orleans, and I found the notebook in Washington, that this man who wrote the notebook collected these pieces all in one day in July 1903. So bringing those back to the community has been very important. My apologies for going over a little bit. Thank you very much.